Welcome back to Haunted and Historic Australia. Today we are exploring Western Sydney's Parramatta Park.
We're at Government House now. Well, it's old Government House, and this was the at least second, possibly third premises for the Governor of New South Wales, and basically ran the country from here from those very early days in 1788. The site of the first house is around behind the present day old Government House. A house, this one in particular, fell into disrepair for a number of decades, having had all of its contents removed, stolen over time, sold. But when they went ahead and they were able to source these things again, some of them tied directly to people who were here in the beginning. They've filled the place up with these beautiful artifacts and furniture once again. Put some pictures up of the actual inside of the house in accompany this video. I hope you enjoyed, and we'll be spending a bit of time in this place. It's known as Parramatta Park. There's a number of points in here that need to be taken, and also need to be they need to be documented, and we're going to document them in our videos.
The Government House offers tours throughout the house to explore the original foundations and how it would have once looked for our governors who called the house home back in 1788. As lockdown restrictions reduce, we should be able to come in and do a tour of the Government House very soon.
I'm up here at the side of the first old Government House. Down there, structure you can see was where I was last filming at the front of the new old Government House, for want of a better description. And so there's a plaque over here that marks the spot of the original house, and this is all that's left. Captain Arthur Phillip. And this particular stone, I believe the sign mentions it was placed here in 1966. Yeah. There it is. This is what remains. Basically, 10 months after they arrived at Sydney Harbour, the Sydney Cable, after they arrived at Botany Bay on the 26th of January 1788. This first governor's residence, Governor Phillips, was constructed.
Governor Thomas MacDougall Brisbane was born in 1773 in Scotland. He became our 6th Governor of New South Wales. He held the position of Governor between 1821 and 1825. Being an amateur astronomer, he established an observatory of his own in 1808 back in his hometown of Ayrshire in Scotland. Accepting the governor's job in 1821, he hoped to build an observatory in Sydney so as that they can finally explore the southern skies, as the southern hemisphere had not been adequately explored. This is where Governor Brisbane decided that next to the government house he would have his own observatory. It would also be for his 2 astronomical assistants, Charles Rumker and James Dunlop also. Although a new observatory was built in Sydney City in 1858, the old Parramatta Observatory had success quite early on. However, in 1858 they upgraded the observatory and had it closer to the current government house. The remains of the old observatory are still there in Parramatta Park today, and there is an obelisk to mark the area. And even in the June of this year, 2021, they had a community get-together where they talked about the history of the observatory. Governor Brisbane also decided he would like a bathhouse under the stars. This was constructed in 1823, where water was pumped through lead pipes from the Parramatta River. The used water was run off through drains of tunnelled brickwork and into a nearby duck pond. As it wasn't everybody's cup of tea, in 1886 the park trustees converted the bathhouse into a pavilion. Sitting on the hill of the grounds of the old government house, or the very first government house, stands the Parramatta Boer War Memorial. The Boer War was a war fought in South Africa. The South Africans wanted their independence and the British Empire wanted to expand. It is known to be of Grecian Doric architecture, and placed upon the top is a pom-pom from South Africa. In the centre of the 4 columns is a marble structure and 4 slabs which are inscribed the names of the fallen soldiers. The Parramatta Boer War Memorial opened on the 23rd of April 1904. It is thought that about 16,000 Australians fought in the Boer War, but not all of them died on the battlefield. 282 are known to have died in action or wounds sustained in battle. 286 were said to have died from disease, and another 38 from accidents or unknown causes. 6 of the Australians in the war received the Victoria Cross, and many others were decorated. The Boer War Memorial marked the fallen Australian soldiers from the Parramatta area. The names of the fallen Australians were Samuel Charles Aitchison, George Henry Flood Gibson, John Joseph Kelly, William John Scott Rundle, James William Watts, Harold Drinkwater, Roland Edward Harkis, Frederick Isaac Kilpatrick, Arthur Enoch Smith, David Willis, George Brooke Foster, Leslie Charles Hill, George Raw, and Leslie Dagworth Tunks. Parramatta's Dairy Cottage. Located in the Parramatta Park, this structure was built in 1798. It is one of the earliest residences in Australia. The Dairy Cottage in Parramatta Park is one of 11 Australian convict sites listed on the UNESCO World Heritage Register. It is also one of Australia's oldest colonial sites. The cottage was constructed between 1796 and 1805 by ex-convict George Salter. He was granted the land on the proviso that he cultivated it and created a farm. This George did very well. By 1800, he had buddied up with another ex-convict named Winifred Marsh, or Winnie, when he arrived into Australia aboard the Royal Admiral in 1792. There was also 3 other convicts who were unnamed living with them. They all built the 2-bedroom cottage. On the farm in 1800, George had 30 acres fully cleared and cultivated, 10 acres in wheat, 20 in maize. He also had 1 horse and 1 pig. George and Winnie lived on the property until about 1813, continuing with the farm until 1813, when it seems they must have gone their separate ways. Later on, George lived in Tasmania.
So here we are, back, new episode since this crazy lockdown of 2021. We're back here, we're in a place called Parramatta Park in Sydney, Western Sydney, and this beautiful old colonial style cottage you see here was once the home of a man named George Salter. And George was in fact the person that for the new colony of Parramatta, the government, old man George was the creator and the important part of the colony, and he was an important part of the growth and the growth of the people. So we're here at George Salter's Dairy Precinct, as it's called, and we're going to go around and we're going to show you a bit, and we're going to do a little bit of we'll do a little investigation in the paranormal department, and that's just there's a mate of mine. He doesn't say much, and then we'll see how we go. This is it, George Salter's Dairy Precinct, Parramatta Park, November 2021.
Governor Lachlan Macquarie purchased George Salter's farm. He gave him 30 heifers or young breeding cows, appointing him superintendent of the government stock. On the 1819 muster, it showed he had a land grant, owned 400 cattle, 80 sheep and a horse, with a large area under cultivation with wheat, barley, beans and potatoes. And George Salter's will revealed that Governor Macquarie had also given him 260 acres of land at the River Styx. After Governor Macquarie had purchased the property in 1813, he converted the cottage into a dairy. They added another building which became the Ranger's Hut. The milk room was described at the time being 19 by 14 feet, which sunk to a depth of 5 feet. along with fixtures, steps, a circular sewer and cesspool. There was a dairy maid employed by the name of Elizabeth Eccles. She was a convict who remained there until her death in 1835. She also in this time worked as a housekeeper to Governors King and Burke at the Government House. She is also reported to have been 105 years old when she died.
Around at the front of the George Salter's old dairy farmhouse, as you can see here, it's talking about back in Lachlan Macquarie's time. This little joint here was part of, not the original house, this is the one on the left of me, but it was actually the secondary house. But this fella here, in this place here, there's a huge, it's almost like a big silo slash churning sort of a bowl, if you like, in the ground in the floor of the building, where they used to churn the milk, I guess, to make cheese, and also possibly to do whatever it is that they do to make it fit for consumption. Pasteurisation wasn't around at that day, but at those times, but they did what they did. And this here, which I believe to be an old drinking bowl for the old horses, yeah, which is interesting. There's a lot of history here in Parramatta. I mean, Parramatta Park is where as we've touched on before in our past videos, which I suggest that you go back and watch from beginning to end, and like, okay, and like, you might as well. I mean, if you're going to dislike, don't bother, but like, all the same, because we put a bit of effort into it, and we're not bad people. The missus is a good woman, and I'm not a bad bloke sometimes when I'm asleep, especially. But yeah, getting back to what I was saying, this is actually Parramatta's probably the most historic place left in Australia, with some of the oldest, let's get the oldest cemetery, places like this here. This is a testament to the time of the situation where people were able to restore and at least keep, without knocking down like they did most other stuff, these sorts of cottages historic, in a way. So I'll come over here and have a look in the window in a second. Give you a look inside. They've got some artifacts in here which sometimes they open up to the public, but I mean, you can see right there with the old fireplace, that was rendered up for a period of time, but they've restored it here. They've done a good job. They haven't wrecked, they haven't taken away from the originality of things, artifacts they've found on display here. They've really done a good job with the place, and sometimes they open it up to the public, and it's a real testament, and it's a real good spot. It's a good snapshot showing the history of this place, and indeed the park.
In 1858, the government domain became a public park, and the dairy cottage became the home of the park ranger. It was the ranger's residence until the adjacent house was constructed in about 1875, and then it became the storeroom. The first ranger was John William Bartlett. He had worked previously as the superintendent of the government house domain before it became a public park. He was a ranger at Parramatta Park until 1864. There have been many rangers over the years. The dairy cottage today has been fully restored. The building itself, along with the ranger's cottage adjacent, have been recently opened to the public for viewing. Unfortunately, due to lockdowns and the pandemic, it has not been open for tours recently. They've not been able to specify a time to resume tours again. But as soon as they do, we're definitely going to be in there, as well as the government house, to show you inside. The grounds have been preserved along with the cottage and ranger's house. so that future generations can enjoy the history. Little Coogee. Back in the early days of Parramatta, along the Parramatta River, there was actually sand. They named it Little Coogee, and it was a very popular spot, especially around the late 1800s and early 1900s, for people to come and swim in the Parramatta River. They even had a life-saving club around 1910, and they put on a show. You can kind of see where the creek is. And down there would have been sand. You can see some of the sand there next to the road. I'll leave a link in the description to a YouTube program by Parramatta City Council showing the life-saving resuscitation exhibition. Today, Little Coogee isn't really there anymore. Unfortunately, the water isn't very nice to swim in, although they do say that around Lake Parramatta, during hot days, there are still people who would dare to swim in there. Due to building the Parramatta pools around the 1950s, the river was not so much used anymore, as well as the threat of the Parramatta eel.
And this is the back of the dairy precinct here. It's funnily enough, the river is down there, Parramatta River, and this area at the back here, river's basically over there, but this area at the back here was known as Little Coogee, and Coogee is actually the name of a beach in Sydney, in the eastern suburbs. But they used to call this Little Coogee because it had a shoreline, it had sand, and really it was the sort of place back in the 30s and earlier that people used to come down behind that fence there. They used to come down here and they'd enjoy themselves, and it was basically, it was a day out. It was a good day out for people, So that area down there, that was known as Little Coogee, the beach. Just discussing Little Coogee before. They've got a small plaque here that gives you just a little snapshot into the way it was. Some quintessential Australian words there, that were given to us via, there it is, the Cumberland Argus, which was a newspaper here in this area back in January 23. But that there is, basically regarding this spot just here, and beyond that little gate, little fence piece over there, that's where the river was, and it was the closest thing you'd find to a beach around, or in this area anyway. That was the Parramatta Park beach. Okay? So you're learning something, eh?
There is also what seems to be vegetables growing nearby to the cottage, and remnants of where a pigsty used to be. Walking around the cottage, you get a sense of what life would have been like back in those days. It is amazing to think that convicts actually built the cottage and that it's still there over 200 years later. It's beautiful the way that the wisteria trees have dropped all of the purple flowers toward the back of the cottage. And the design of the cottage itself is just so foreign to what we have today. Even the ranger's cottage, with its doors and windows, looks so strange to us, but that was how things were built back in the day. The cottage was built from local materials, including gumtree wood. The only items that were outsourced were nails and glass for the windows. And due to the fragile nature of the cottages, only a few people are allowed to tour through at a time. You can still see where the original wood was. And the cobblestones in the concrete floor, the original trees that must have been there back in those early days. On the path toward the back of the cottage looks to be a wooden post. Perhaps there was a gate back in the day. The grounds are very well kept. There seems to be a wash shed at the back of the ranger's cottage, with many doors going into these buildings. I wonder why they had so many doors at the back. Perhaps part of it was a storeroom. I can't wait to get a tour just to find out what's inside. Parramatta Park is also significant as it was a landing place for William Ewart Hart, or Bill the Flying Dentist. In 1911, he took his biplane, completing the first cross-country flight in New South Wales. It took him 55 minutes from Penrith, landing in the field next to the cottages at Parramatta Park. Bill was the first qualified pilot in Australia. His aviator's licence number 1 was issued on the 5th of December 1911 by the Aerial League of Australia. Born, raised and educated in Parramatta, first he was a dentist and then a pilot. He has a plaque erected at Parramatta Park. William died in 1943, aged 56. But the story of the plane landing in Parramatta Park lives on. Parramatta Park is one of historic significance, as well as a community favourite for picnics and recreation. I myself share many memories, as well as Mitch, growing up close to the Parramatta region, having family events at Parramatta Park, taking my daughter on bike rides through the park. It has definitely left us with very fond memories, and we hope that the park will be around for community and historic purposes for many, many years to come. We hope you enjoyed this video. We certainly had fun making it. Once the tours are back up and running again, we're definitely going to be back to do more historical exploration. And also we have an upcoming video in hopefully the next few weeks where we do a night explore in Parramatta Park. We hope you join us.
I see